पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पाद शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं। शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। गुकारस्त्वन्धकारश्च तन्निवर्तकः अन्धकारनिरोधित्वात् गुरुरित्यभिधीयते। सदाशिवसमारम्भाम् शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम् वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। नमः श्री शङ्करानन्द गुरुपादाम्बुजन्मने सविलासमहामोह ग्राहग्रासैककर्मणे। Verse 150. अचिन्त्य खलु ये भावाः न तांस्तर्केषु योजयेत्। अचिन्त्य रचनारूपम् मनसापि जगत् खलु। अचिन्त्य रचना शक्ति बीजं मायेति निश्चिनम्। माया बीजं तदेवैकम् सुषुप्तावनुभूयते। जाग्रत्स्वप्नजगत्तत्र लीनं बीज इव द्रुमः। तस्मादशेषजगतः वासनास्तत्र संस्थिताः। अचिन्त्य रचना रूपम मनसापि जगत खलो. Jagat, this creation is manasapi achintya rachana rupam. This creation is really incomprehensible by the mind, because you take anything and you find that a given question leads to other series of questions, and ultimately you are confronted with a mystery. The simple illustration that was discussed here was this human body, how it comes out from little drop of semen, and nobody can explain how that little insignificant thing gave rise to a body which retahat chetati or chestate, how that little drop of semen ultimately moves about. Hasta mastaka pada prodbhuta nanankuram, it comes out with the hands and legs and hair and whatnot. Paryayana sishutva yavana jara vesaihi anekaihi utam, that thing goes through all the variety of stages of being the infant and then the youth and the old and so forth and so on. Pasyati atti shrunoti jighajasa gacchati atha agacchati. He sees what sees. He sees, hears, thinks, goes, comes and so forth. That little drop of semen. What more ascharya, or wonder can there be? And thus, just as it is just mind-boggling, meaning inexplicable, something that is not comprehensible by the mind, and so if you take anything in the creation you find, it is just not comprehensible. Another illustration that was taken was that of a banyan tree, and the seed of a banyan tree is atomic in size, and from that such a huge tree comes out. If you split the seed, you don't find anything in there, but certainly the whole tree must be there. And we cannot imagine and cannot explain how the whole tree is contained in that atomic size tree. Where is that little dhanaha, meaning the seed, and where is this tree? And this also is inexplicable. And thus, whatever you really take up for analysis, you find that up to a certain point you can explain the thing, and beyond that, it just becomes a mystery. You are confronted with what we call the wall of ignorance, or a veil of ignorance. And so those people who are proud in thinking that they can really explain the world, they can define everything and explain the world, well, all of them have been very well taken care of by people in the Vedantic teachers who, by exhibiting a superior logic or intellect, can show the fallacies or limitations of the logic of other people. But ultimately you find that any explanation that you give, any definition you give for anything is ultimately going to be, in some sense, limited or incomplete, because whatever definition you give is going to be a standpoint which can be falsified or shown to be incomplete from another standpoint. And therefore it is said that don't waste your time in trying to understand the creation in the sense of defining it. But the way you have to understand is the whole creation is a product of Maya. That is the way to understand the creation, and not that it is such and such. No one can ever say that anything is such and such, and if you try, well, one question will lead to another question, and you just go round the circles. So many different defects will come, logical defects, and thus this whole creation is achintya rachana rupam. Achintya means incomprehensible by the mind, and that is why it is called Maya. So first of all it is shown how the whole creation is achintya, meaning incomprehensible, and therefore the cause of the creation also has to be incomprehensible. If the effect is incomprehensible, the cause has to be incomprehensible. And therefore, may you know Maya as the cause of this creation which is incomprehensible. So Maya, the cause, is something that is inferred. The effect is something that we see, the cause we do not see. Like the tree we see, the root we do not see. But we infer the presence of root, because otherwise the tree cannot be. And so also, we infer the presence of cause from the effect, because no effect can be without a cause. The whole world or universe is an effect, and therefore it must have a cause. And the effect carries the same characteristics as that of the cause. Effect cannot have characteristics other than those of the cause. A golden ornament will exhibit only the characteristics of gold and not of some other matter. And so also when we find incomprehensibility in this world, we also infer that Maya, which is the cause of this universe, also is incomprehensible, because that is the characteristic exhibited by this universe. So effect, namely world, shows this characteristic of incomprehensibility, and therefore Maya, which is the cause, also is inferred to be incomprehensible. Achintya rachana shakti bijam Maya iti nistino. May you ascertain this or understand that Maya is the cause of this creation which is achintya. And where do we find this Maya? This Maya bijam tadeva ekam sushuptau anubhuyate. And what we experience in deep sleep is nothing but this Maya. Because in deep sleep there is a blanket of ignorance, and that is also the cause. That's the reason why it is called the causal body. The gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. Ignorance is the causal body, and this is what is experienced in deep sleep. How do you say that what we experience in deep sleep is really the cause of the whole creation? Because Jagrat Swapna Jagat Tatra Leenam Bija Ivat Drumaha. Bija Drumaha Leenaha. Just as in a seed, the whole tree is found in a potential form. Had it not been so, the tree could not necessarily come out from a seed, and therefore a mango seed must necessarily contain the potential of the entire mango tree, and not that of a lemon tree or some other tree, because otherwise you would have any tree coming from any seed, but we find that from a particular seed, a particular kind of tree alone, it comes out, and therefore that tree is potentially contained in the seed. Now, of course, the effect is always potentially contained in the cause. And we find that in the deep sleep also, the waking and the dream states are potentially contained, because from the deep sleep is born the dream state, and from the dream state is born the waking state. Jagrat swapna jagat tatra linam. Tatra means sushupto. Jagrat swapna jagat linam. This whole universe characterized by waking and dream is there is merged or is potentially there in the deep sleep state. Just as a tree is potentially present in the seed. Tasmat ashesha jagatah vasanaha tatra samstitaha. And therefore we say that in the deep sleep, which is of the nature of Maya, that is the causal state, ashesha jagatah vasanaha. Vasanaha means samskara, or the potential of the entire creation is very much there in the deep sleep, in the Maya. Okay, now continuing, Tatopakim, suppose in the deep sleep. Now the interesting discussion that's going to be is that this deep sleep that individual experiences is not the individual sleep really, but then it is the common sleep or the universal sleep. The waking is an individual experience or individual state. Dream is an individual state, because the waker that I am is different from the waker that you are. And so everybody's waking experiences or waking state is different. Everybody's dream state is also different. However, the deep sleep that I experience is no different from the deep sleep that you experience, is no different from the deep sleep that the Lord experiences at the time of Pralaya, because there is nothing to distinguish one deep sleep from the other one. Because deep sleep also is called Nirvikalpaka, because that vikalpa, the duality between the experience and the experience, the subject and the object also is not there. And it is unqualified experience. There is no qualification, and therefore unqualified experience of one individual is no different from the unqualified experience of another individual. And therefore, that very deep sleep that we experience alone is the universal sleep, you might say, and therefore that alone is called the Maya. And so this is Tatopikam. Suppose you say that the deep sleep, which is Maya, has the potential of the entire creation. So what is it that you are trying to tell us? And that is said in the verse 53. Ya buddhivasanastasu chaitanyam pratibimbate मेघाकाशवदस्पष्ट चिलाभासो नुमीयताम्. या बुद्धिवासनाः तासु चैतन्यम प्रतिबिंबते. Now, the deep sleep, as we said, is the causal state, because from that emerges the dream as well as the waking state. And therefore, the samskaras or the impressions of the waking and the dream must be there in deep sleep. Otherwise, there is no way that the waking and dream state can emerge from the deep sleep. Just as the ornament emerges from the gold, and therefore that ornament, form and name of the ornament is there in the potential form in the gold, and so also, since the waking and dream emerge from the deep sleep, well, the deep sleep must have in the potential form the waking and the dream. This is what we call samskara, or the vasana, or the impressions, or the potential. So, what we have, what is called waking state is nothing but an avastha or a state of the mind. What we call dream state also is nothing but a state of the mind. Because waking and dream and deep sleep are really states of mind, not states of self or consciousness. And so we say that this mind, which undergoes the transformation in the form of waking and dream, all these impressions are potentially there in the deep sleep state. So ya buddhi vasanaha, all the vasanas are the potential of this buddhi of the mind. Tasu, they are all there in the deep sleep state also. Chaitanyam pratibimbhati. And there also the Chaitanya of the consciousness gets reflected. So, wherever the buddhi is, there the consciousness must get reflected. Wherever water is, there the sun must get reflected, because it is the nature of water to reflect the sun. This is called sahaja tadatmyam. So wherever the reflecting medium is, there the image must be reflected. Wherever the mirror is, well, it will reflect my face if I am in front of it. It is the characteristic of a reflecting surface. And we find that in the waking state, the buddhi or the intellect reflects consciousness, and you have therefore what we call chidavasaha, or reflected consciousness, which is what we call jivaha, or the individual. And therefore, in the deep sleep also, this buddhi doesn't get destroyed. You see, the ahankara, the personality of the intellect, does not get destroyed in deep sleep state. If it gets destroyed, then you cannot wake up. So, we say that the whole of my personality is there in a potential form in the deep sleep state. And that's why when I wake up, the same I wakes up. The fellow who went to sleep wakes up, otherwise he'll wake up different people, but we don't. The same person wakes up from the deep sleep also. That shows that all my memories, my impressions, my complexes, my knowledge, everything is there in the deep sleep, except that it is aspashtam. Aspashtam means avyaktam, unmanifest or undifferentiated. But it is very much there. And in that potential state also, the consciousness gets reflected. If consciousness gets reflected in the buddhi, in the waking state, when the buddhi assumes a certain form, like happiness and happiness, the waking, dream, etc., there the consciousness gets reflected. When the very same buddhi is in the samskara form, the potential form, then also the consciousness should get reflected there, because it is the nature of buddhi to reflect the consciousness. So they say, ya buddhi vasanaha tasu chaitanyam pratibimbhati. In the deep sleep also, the buddhi vasanas or the potential samskaras of the buddhis are there, and there also chaitanya, the consciousness, gets reflected. Question, nanu tasu pratibimbha asti chet kuto nanubhuyate. If in the deep sleep, where the buddhi is in the form of samskara, the potential form, if you say that the consciousness is reflected in that buddhi, kutaha nanubhuyate, tasu means buddhi vasana. So if consciousness is reflected in the samskara of the buddhi in the deep sleep, how come we do not experience that? Iti asankya aspashtatvad, because that buddhi is not in spashta. Meaning, in the waking state, the buddhi of the mind appears in specific form, like sukham, dukkham, kamaha, krodha, ghatavritti, padavritti. All the different thought forms that arise moment to moment is nothing but the modifications of the mind. And all these various thought forms are in a potential form in a deep sleep state. So in deep sleep state, the buddhi is there alright, but a particular form is not there. In the waking state, that buddhi keeps on assuming different specific forms, like sukhavritti, dukkhavritti, ghatakara-vritti, patakara-vritti. So all these different specific thought forms are there. However, in deep sleep, the potential thought form is there, but specific thought form is not there. Just as when you take the gold and mold various ornaments, then you have a variety of ornaments like bangle, etc., having specific name and form. But then before the making, all the ornaments are there in the gold, but then you cannot distinguish them. They are in unmanifest form or undifferentiated form. And so also, the various thoughts that arise in the waking and dream state, you may say that they are there in a potential form in the deep sleep state. Since they are not clear, meaning they are not manifest, therefore the reflection of the consciousness also is not known to us in a manifest state. Because they are in unmanifest state, therefore the reflection also is not known to us directly in the deep sleep. Therefore it says, Meghākāsavat aspashta chidābhāsaha anumyatam. Aspashta chidābhāsaha. If you remember in the beginning of this chapter alone, the author gave some analogies. He described these four states. He said there is a pot in which that means there is a ghata, in which there is space which is what we call ghatakasa. And that ghata, suppose is full of water. Then in that water, that akasa of the nature of the stars, clouds, etc. gets reflected. This is what we call jalakasam. So akasa or the sky reflected in the water is called jalakasam. Akasa conditioned by water or reflected in water. This is Vyasti or the individual parts. Now imagine the cloud which covers the whole sky. That cloud also is nothing but water alone. Why do we say that? In the cloud also there is water. Cloud must be nothing but the water particles. Because from there the water rains. And since the water, we see the rain, coming from the cloud. Therefore we infer that in the cloud also the water is there in small particles. That's called tushara or little particles. And that water, when it is filled in a pot, reflects the akasa. Then that same water which is in a cloud in a droplet form also must reflect akasa, because it is nature of water to reflect the space. Therefore, that water and the sky that is reflected in the water, in the cloud, we call Meghākāsaha. So one is called Ghatākāsaha or Jalākāsaha, other is called Meghākāsaha. This Meghākāsaha means the space of the sky reflected in the cloud is a matter of inference, not something that you can see. So the cloud, that is reflected, or the space that is reflected in the water in a pot can be seen. You can see the stars and the clouds reflected there. But you cannot see that reflection in the cloud. Why is it so? Because the water is there in a potential form and not in a specific or manifest form. So that is called aspashtam. Just as the reflection of the sky is unmanifest or undifferentiated in a cloud, but it is nevertheless there. Why do we say it is there? We infer. Tarhi kutah tat siddhi ityatah anumiyatam. By inference we know. So first of all, first inference is, in the cloud there is water. Why do we say? Because from the cloud the rainwater comes. And therefore the cloud is the source of rain. And therefore the water must be there. Second inference is, in that water which is there in the cloud, the sky must be reflected. Because it is the nature of water to reflect the sky wherever it is. So we say that in the megha of the cloud also, the sky is reflected. Similarly also, in the waking and dream state, we find the buddhi or the thought specifically there reflecting the consciousness. In the deep sleep state, all these thoughts are potentially there. And therefore we say that they must reflect consciousness in deep sleep also, although it is not evident to us, just as the space reflected in the cloud is not evident, but is there, and that is what we know by inference. So it says anumiyatam. Well, this point is made in the subsequent discussion. Says the Tikākara here, Nanu megham shodakasya aspashtākāsa pratibimbavatvevi tajjādiyasya ghatodakasya spashtākāsa pratibimbavatah sadbhāvāt meghākāsa anumanam ghatate. So Nanu question, meghamsha udakasya. Udaka means the water which is meghamsham. Megha means a cloud, amsha means a little fraction. So the water is the little droplets which make up the cloud. Every droplet is a fraction of the cloud. Akasa pratibimbavatvevi. And we infer that, yes, that droplet of water which makes up the cloud does reflect the akasa or the sky. Why? Tajjādiyasya ghatodakasya spashtākāsa pratibimbavatah sadbhāvāt. So how do we say? We infer that water in the cloud must reflect the space or the sky, because a similar water which is filled in the pot does reflect the space. So since the water in the pot reflects the space, therefore infer that the water in the cloud also reflects the space. Tajjatiyam. Tajjatiyam means jalatvena megham sodaka samana jatiyasya, meaning that water in the pot is the same as the water in the cloud, and so both of them must exhibit the same characteristic of reflecting the space. And so the inference of this cloud being, the space being reflected in the cloud water is understandable because we have the illustration of this water in the pot. So meghakasha anumanam ghatate, the inference of the sky reflected in the megha or the cloud is quite alright. Iha means vasanagata chidavasa. However, now we are saying that consciousness is reflected in the deep sleep, also in the buddhi which is potentially there. Iha tathavida drishtanda abhavat. But what drishtanda illustration do you have to infer that the consciousness is reflected in the buddhi vasana, in the deep sleep state? Katham anumano dahityasankya atrapi tathavida drishtanda sampadhanaya aha. In this case also a similar illustration is there which enables us to infer the presence of reflected consciousness in the Maya also, on the deep sleep also. Which we already discussed, and the same point is made in verse 54. Sabhasameva tadbijam dhirupena prarohati ato buddhau chidabhasaha vispashtam pratibhasate. Sabhasameva tadbijam dhirupena prarohati. Says this very buddhi, meaning the mind, is bijam. Bijam means in potential form in the deep sleep state, because in the waking and dream it manifests itself in specific thought forms. So sabhasam meaning tikakara chidabhasa vishistam, tad bijam meaning tadeva ajnanam, dhirupena meaning buddhirupena, prarohati meaning parinamamanam, vispashta chidabhasavad bhavati iti bhavaha. So that is just as the cloud contains the particles of water, which we say the water is in a potential form in the cloud, so also the deep sleep state contains the buddhi in a potential form. So we see the rain coming from the cloud, individual water drops, and so from the waking state we have individual thought forms. Therefore we say that in the deep sleep state all those thought forms are there in a potential state. So chidabhasa vishistam tadeva ajnanam, that ignorance which is endowed with the reflected consciousness, buddhirupena parinamamanam, that very ignorance, just as that very cloud gets transformed into the rain, into water, so also that very ignorance in the deep sleep state gets transformed into the waking state. Because what is waking state? It's something that is derived from the deep sleep. So waking is called the effect of the deep sleep. In the waking we have our mind and intellect and the thought specifically there, and therefore we say that the ignorance contains all this potential, and that alone results into the waking in the dream state. So buddhirupena parinamamanam vispashta chidabhasavad bhavati. So we find vispashta chidabhasa meaning a clear reflected consciousness in the waking and dream state. So we say that in the deep sleep also the unclear or unmanifest reflection of the consciousness is there in the deep sleep also. Ataha buddhau chidabhasah vispashtam pratibhasate. Therefore in the buddhi this chidabhasa can be very clearly appreciated. Evam chedam anumanam atra suchitam bhavati. This is the inference that is contained in this particular statement. Vimata buddhivasanaha chit pratibimvatyah bhavitum buddhi avastha vishesatvat buddhivrittivat iti. Vimata means where the vivada obtains, buddhivasanaha chit pratibimbavatya bhavitum arhati. All those buddhivasanas, meaning all these potential samskaras or the vasanas are there in the deep sleep, they also must reflect the consciousness. Buddhi avastha visheshatvat. Because in the deep sleep also, we have the buddhi or the mind in a potential form is also a state of the mind. So deep sleep also is a state of mind. Dream also is a state of mind. Waking also is a state of mind. The very same mind is sleeping, the very same mind is dreaming, the very same mind is waking. If in the dream and the waking state, if that mind reflects consciousness, then as we said, waking also is a state of mind which reflects consciousness. Deep sleep also is a state of mind, therefore that also must reflect consciousness. Why? Avastha visheshatvat, buddhi avastha visheshatvat. The deep sleep also is a buddhi avastha, is a state of mind. Buddhi vrittivat, like the various thoughts which occur in our mind are nothing but the avastha or the states of mind, and as each state of mind in the waking state reflects the consciousness, so wherever mind is or wherever a state of mind is, it must reflect consciousness, as in the waking. Deep sleep also is a state of mind, and therefore there also must reflect consciousness. So the illustration is buddhi vrittivat. Buddhi vritti means the different thoughts in the waking and dream becomes an illustration to show that wherever there is a state of mind, there the reflection is. The deep sleep also is a state of mind, and therefore there also the reflection must be. So ignorance has the potential of all these thoughts of buddhi vrittis and deep sleep, and therefore there also consciousness must be reflected. Even though we do not clearly see it, even though it is not evident to us in the deep sleep state, we have to accept that in the deep sleep also, since the reflecting medium, namely buddhi, is there in the potential form, therefore the consciousness must be reflected. So this is how I want to arrive at the whole concept of Ishvara. Because the waking and dream states are called vyasti or individual states. The deep sleep state is samasti, the total, because in deep sleep, as we said, the deep sleep of one cannot be said to be different from the deep sleep of another one. So in the deep sleep, all the individuals merge into totality. And therefore, that is a state which is comparable to, or which is Ishvara. And thus, Ishvaratvam also has been established here. That deep sleep itself is a Maya, and that Maya also, the consciousness gets reflected, because the buddhi, which is a reflecting medium, is potentially there, and therefore, that consciousness reflected in the Maya is called Ishvara, and the consciousness reflected in the individual buddhi, in the waking and dream, is called Jivaha. And that is how the existence of Ishvara and Jiva, both of them, is due to Maya, and that is what has been established in these arguments here. Evam jiveshvarayoho mayikatvam shruti uktam upapadadam upasamharati. Evam, in this manner, jiveshvarayoho mayikatvam, that jiva also is mayika, meaning a product of Maya. Ishvara also is a concept in Maya. Just as jiva is a concept in Maya, it is Maya that creates a sense of individuality. Understand, the sense of individuality is something that is in relation to the totality. The totality is where individuality is where totality is. Just as the master is there when the servant is there, and servant is there only when the master is there. The son is there when the father is there, father is there when the son is there. So just as son and father, the master and servant, they are relative concepts, and so also individuality and totality are also relative concepts, one in relation to the other. So jiva is called vyasti, or the individual, and Ishvara is samasti, or the total. Evam jiveshvarayoho mayikatvam, that jiva also is a concept, Maya, by Maya, meaning it is Maya that makes that Brahman or the consciousness as appearing as jiva, and same Maya makes that Brahman appear as Ishvara. How does that Maya make Brahman appear as jiva? When being reflected in the individual Upadi. And same Maya makes that Brahman appear as Ishvara as reflected in the total Upadi. Shruti Uktam, this is what Shruti had said. Upapaditam, which has been shown here by logic. upasamharati, that is now being concluded in the verse 155. Maya bhasena jiveshu karoti tishrutau shrutam meghakasa jalakasau ivatau suvyavasthitau. Maya bhasena jiveshu karoti. This is a statement from Nisimha Uttarapapani Upanishad. Maya abhasena jiveshu karoti. Abhasena meaning by reflection. Jiva isau karoti. It is Maya alone that brings about the concept of Jiva, and Maya alone that brings about the concept of Ishvara. Therefore, Ishvara has the same degree of reality as Jiva. So Ishvara is there only with reference to Jiva. That's why they say, where is God if the devotees are not there? And so only when devotees are there, then God is. Because if Jiva is not there, there is no Ishvara. So it is Maya alone that in which the concept of Jiva and Ishvara are there, because both are reflections in Maya, in aspects of Maya. In the totality that Maya is, the reflection is called Ishvara. When that Maya reflects, results into what we call ignorance or individual ignorance, then a sense of individuality, that same thing is called Jiva. So Maya abhasena jivesau karoti iti shrutau shrutam. This is what shrutam means, shrutya pratipadam. This is what Shruti in fact teaches us. It is Maya alone which, on account of the abhas or reflection, creates the concepts of Jiva and Ishvara. Nanu jiveshayoho mayikatve samane katham avantar bheda siddhi. If Jiva also is a product of Maya, and you say Ishvara also is a concept in Maya, then how come there is this difference between Jiva and Ishvara? Both are Mayika. Both are the creations of Maya, if this is so. Then how come the Jiva is different from Ishvara? Jiva is limited in every respect. Ishvara is limitless in all respects. One is Alpajnaha, Alpashaktiman, Jiva, and Ishvara is Sarvajnaha, Sarvashaktiman. So what is it that is responsible for this difference? If both are the products of Maya, then what is it that accounts for the difference that we find between Jiva and Ishvara? Katham avantar bheda siddhi. This kind of bheda. So there is no main bheda. The mukhya bheda is not there. Mukhyatve, what is the main characteristic? Mayikatvam. So Jiva also is Mayika, Ishvara also is Mayika. But avantar bheda is there, meaning secondary differences are there. What are they? Alpajnatvam, Sarvajnatvam. Alpashaktimatvam, Sarvashaktimatvam. Okay, how do you account for that difference that obtains in Jiva and Ishvara? Iti asanke, aspashta spashta upadimatvena megakasha yalakashayohoya tat siddhiti aha. One is called aspashta upadi, other is called spashta upadi. Spashta means evident, aspashta means not evident. So this Jiva is evident. This individual upadi of the body, mind, intellect, that is the spashta upadi, means evident upadi. Just as the water in a pot is water that is evident, very clearly manifest or clearly appreciated, and so also this individual mind is an upadi that is very clearly appreciated. However, the water that obtains in a cloud, even though it is there, is not clearly evident. And so also the Maya has what we call the totality of all the upadis. So this individual upadi which is called the buddhi, and all the buddhi of all the jivas are potentially there in the Maya, but they are not evident. Just as there are million pots in which the rainwater is there, each pot exhibits it evidently. Same water, when it is in the form of cloud, is not evident because the totality of all the water is there in the cloud. And so also the individual minds are something that is evident. But then when all the minds are there in what we call Maya, then these differences are not evident. And therefore, the difference in Jiva and Ishvara on account of the individuality and totality of Vyashti and Samashti. Just as the difference between the water in a pot and in the cloud. And so also one mind and the total mind. So aspashta upadimatvena meghakasha jalakashayoho iva tat siddhihi. So meghakasha, the space reflected in the cloud, jalakasha, the space reflected in the water on the pot. So tat siddhihi, similarly also we can see the difference. So even though both are water, the megha also is water, the cloud, and the water in the pot also is water. That way they are not different. But still there is a difference. What brings about the difference? One is evident, other is not evident. One is Vyashti, other is Samashti. One is individual, other is total. And that's what is said in the line, second line. Meghakasha jalakasha iva tau suvyavastitau. Just as there is what we call Meghakasha, meaning the space reflected in the cloud. Jalakasha, meaning the space reflected in the pot water. Similarly also, the consciousness reflected in the Maya, which is the totality of all the buddhis, and consciousness reflected in individual buddhis. This is what brings about the difference between Ishvara and Jiva. Jiva is first aparoksha, Ishvara is paroksha. That's the reason why Ishvara always is a matter of inference. Certainly, Shruti reveals that there is Ishvara, but we cannot demonstrate Ishvara. We only always have to show or potentially the existence of Ishvara by inference. Why? Because Ishvara is totality, and totality becomes a matter of inference based on individuality, because where individuality is, the totality must be. Where the effect is, the cause must be. Where the tree is, there the root must be. So the root cannot be demonstrated because it is not evident, aspashta. However, we definitely infer the existence of cause where we find the effect. And so Jiva is the effect and the Ishvara is cause. So Shruti says Ishvara is, and logic also will show how Ishvara is in the form of the cause. So earlier it came, Karyopadarayam Jivaha, Karanopadir Ishvaraha. The Jiva is called Karyopadhi, Ishvara is called Karana Upadhi. This is Karya Upadhi, Upadhi in the form of effect, and Ishvara has Karana Upadhi, Upadhi in the form of, in the state of cause. That's why when children ask us, where is God? You can't demonstrate. But then, all the time when we have to, by argument, we lead them to inference. So that's how we tell different stories to children. We tell them the story of the Devatas and the Yaksha of the Kenopanishad. And the fire, the god of fire, was not even able to burn a straw. Or the wind was not able to blow a straw. How come? Then they don't first realize what it means. Then later on, sometimes several children will give different answers. And somehow the answer will come because the fire doesn't have the ability to burn on its own, but that ability to find is imparted by someone. Who imparts the fire? So because it is demonstrated the fire was not able to burn. That shows that burning that the fire has is on account of something other than fire. If fire himself was capable of burning, it would have burned that straw. That it could not burn, that shows that the ability on the part of fire to burn is on account of some factor other than fire. Who is that factor? It's a God. How come wind was not able to blow? Because wind did not enjoy the grace of God. And therefore, the ability that the wind has to blow is on account of God. And then you go on, that you are able to lift your arm. Who gives you that ability? God. You are able to talk. Who gives that ability? God. And like that, they will be able to see. But then, it still remains a matter of inference. So, God has to be shown by inference. Because Sarvajna, Sarvashaktiman, Sarvavyapi, the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, can never be realized by us. We can never realize God, who is omniscient, omnipotent, because it is totality of all the upadhi, and our mind can never comprehend that totality. Our mind can comprehend Brahman, which is Nirvishesham, alright. But then that Savishesham Brahma, which is Sarvajnam, Sarvashaktimat, that can never be comprehended by the mind. And that is only established, only revealed by Shruti, is something that also can be verified by us through logic in this manner. Okay, and that Ishasya Meghakasha Samyam Sfuti Karoti. That Meghakasha Samyam, that similarity of Lord with Meghakasha, meaning the space reflected in the cloud, Sfuti Karoti, that similarity is made clear here in the verse 156. Meghavat vartate maya meghasthita tusharvat dhivasanaschidabhasah tusharasthakavasthitah. मेघवत वर्तते माया मेघस्थित तुषारवत धीवासनाः चिदाभासः तुषारस्थ खवत स्थितः. Maya meghavad vartate. Maya is comparable to megha or the cloud, which means totality of the water. All that we mean by cloud is the upadhi of the jiva, we mean individual upadhi in the mind, and by maya we mean the totality of the upadhi. So maya meghavad vartate. That maya is comparable to megha or the cloud. And dhivasanaha, the individual and the potential of all the buddhis or potential of all the minds is comparable to megha sthita tusharavat. In that megha, the cloud was tushara. Tushara means what? The particles of water. So just as there is a totality of all the particles of water in the cloud, so also in the maya there is totality of all the buddhis. So individual buddhis compared to a particle, and just as cloud contains all the particles of water, so also maya contains all the buddhis in a potential form. So it says, Dhivasanaha meghasthita tusharavat. Dhivasana means the buddhis, the vasana of the buddhi or the buddhi in the potential form are comparable to the water drops in the cloud. And chidabhasaha tusharastha khavatstitaha. And chidabhasaha, and that consciousness reflected in maya, which is called Ishvaraha, is compared to tusharastha kha. Kha means space. Tusharastha, so space reflected in tushara, meaning in the water particles. So in the cloud, the water particles are there, and those water particles reflect the sky, and so also in the maya, the buddhi is there in a potential form, and that the total buddhi reflects also the consciousness. And the Ishvara is nothing but the consciousness reflected in the maya, which contains all the buddhi vrittis in a potential form. And that is the concept of Ishvara. Maya pratibimbasya Ishvaratve kim pramanam. So what is your pramanam? Pramanam means Shruti. What proof do you have to say that Ishvara is Maya pratibimbitaha? That which is reflected in Maya is Ishvara. For you to say that, what is the pramanam or what is the valid means of knowledge? Proof iti asankya Shruti eva. There also Shruti or Upanishad alone is a pramanam to say that Ishvara, the Lord, is the consciousness reflected in Maya. What is Maya? The totality of all upadhis. That's what he said in the verse 157. Mayadhinaschidaabhasaha Shrutau Mayi Maheshwaraha Antaryami cha sarvajñah. Jagad yonis sa eva hi. मायाधीनः चिदाभासः श्रुतौ मायी महेश्वरः अंतर्यामी सर्वज्ञः जगद्योनिः स एव हि इति श्रुतौ श्रुतः. That Maya adhinah chidabhasa. Chidabhasa means reflected consciousness. Maya adhinah, that is governed by Maya. Meaning the consciousness that is reflected in Maya alone is called Maheshwaraha in the Shruti. So when, that's what Shruti says. So Mayam tu Prakritim Vidyat, Mayanam tu Maheshwaram. That may you know Maya is Prakriti or the material cause of the whole creation, and may you know that Maheshwara as Maya or the control of the Maya. So when the Shruti says Maheshwara or Maya, what is meant there is the consciousness of Brahman reflected in Maya. Except that the difference is that same consciousness when reflected in the individual mind, it then comes under the control of the Maya. While same consciousness reflected in the totality of the Maya, then it controls the Maya. There is a difference. So Ishvara is not under the control of Maya. On the other hand, Ishvara controls the Maya. However, Jiva is under the control of Maya because there is a sense of individuality born out of ignorance. There is knowledge of totality born out of knowledge. And so, in case of Ishvara, he is Sarvajna, all-knowing, and therefore he controls his Maya. In case of Jiva, he is ignorant and therefore under the spell of Maya. That's the difference. But Maya adhinaha chidabhasa. Adhinaha, that does not mean under control on account of that chidabhasa or the reflected consciousness which is on account of Maya. He is called Mayi. Maya means what? One who is the controller of Maya. Maheshwaraha is called the great Lord. Na kevalam, so he is called Ishvaraha. The idea is, how do you say that the consciousness reflected in Maya is called Ishvara? That's so Mayinam tu Maheshwaram. So that Mayi and Maheshwara, these are the terms used by the Shruti, Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Therefore we say that the same one that is referred to as Maheshwaraha is nothing but the consciousness reflected in Maya. Because Mayi, see, Mayam tu Prakritim Vidyat, Mayinam tu Maheshwaram. The one who is Mayi is called Maheshwara. What is Mayi? Maya means one who is reflected in Maya. That alone is called Maheshwara. So who is reflected in the Maya? What we call Chidabhasa. So that Ishvara or Brahman that is reflected in Maya, which is called Maya, alone is called Maheshwara, and therefore he alone is Ishvara. So Ishvara is the consciousness reflected in Maya, which has the potential of all the buddhis. Na kevalam Ishvaratvam asya shrutam apidu antaryamittvadikamapi dharmajatam shrutamasti. Na kevalam Ishvaratvam asya shrutam. Not only that, this Chidabhasa, meaning the reflected consciousness in Maya is called Ishvara, apitu, but then antaryamittvadikamapi, that he alone is antaryami. He is the indwelling self. It is dharmajatam. All these various characteristics, like Sarvajna, Sarvashaktiman, Sarvavyapi, Antaryami, Sarveshwara, Sarvajna, all of these is dharmajatam. This whole group of characteristics of Ishvara are also stated in the Shruti. And so the same one who is reflected in the Maya alone is referred to Ishvara and also referred to the Antaryami, etc. in the Shruti. So all that dharmajatam, that whole group of dharma also we find in Shruti. Antaryami cha sarvajñah jagadyonihi sa evahi. That very same Chidabhasa alone is called Antaryami, meaning the indwelling self. Sarvajñah, the omniscient one. Jagadyonihi, the very cause of the creation, that alone is. And so now the author here is explaining, because in Shruti, in the Upanishads, you don't find this kind of prakriyas. Upanishad doesn't tell you that Ishvara is the consciousness reflected in Maya. You don't find this kind of terminology in Upanishad. So purpose of this text is to provide an explanation of the various expressions found in the Upanishads. When you study Mandukya Upanishad, Mandukya will say, Esha Sarveshwarah, Esha Sarvajnah, Esha Antaryami, Esha Yonis Sarvasya, Prabhavapyayohi Bhutana. This is what Mandukya Upanishad will say. The same one is Sarveshwarah, he is the Lord of all. Sarvajnah, he is omniscient. Esha Antaryami, he is the very indwelling self. Esha Yonihi Sarvasya, he is the very cause of everything. Prabhavapyayohi Bhutanam, because the beings are born of him and beings all merge back into him. And therefore, he is the very cause of everything. Now how? For us to intellectually comprehend this principle, all these methods are given here for us to be able to comprehend. How the same consciousness becomes Antaryami, etc. When reflected in the totality of the Upadi. And that's why the concept of this Mega, meaning totality of the water, and Ghata, meaning the individuality of the water, all these concepts are presented for us to comprehend how same space of the sky reflected in the pot is an individual characteristic, reflected in the cloud has a characteristic of totality. And so also the very same awareness reflected in the individual mind has a characteristic of individuality, reflected in that Maya with the total mind has the characteristic of totality. Okay. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah. Ishvaro Gururatmedi Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.